will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via YouTube, Stitcher and Apple Podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, in the current circumstances, I have to ask, are you still with us?
Yes, just about. Struggling through like I guess everyone at the moment.
So I think we know what's going to be top of the list, but what have we got to discuss today?
Well, as if things weren't depressing enough, we've brought you another podcast. Obviously, we're going to have to start off talking about the COVID-19 situation and the tragedy unfolding in front of us. We'll talk about the Labour Party leadership, an update from DEMOC, a democratically elected Mayor of Croydon campaign, and talk maybe a bit about what to do to stay busy and some of the things we've been doing in the CC.
Cheers, Mike. It's good to know you're well. Like a lot of people, I myself have been working from home for the last few days, and there's no sign of us getting back to normal for a while. Obviously, this coronavirus, the Chinese coronavirus, there you go, I'll say it. It's caused absolute mayhem with society and is going to cause problems for the economy going forward. The pubs are shut. There's no gyms. There's no sport to watch on TV, and now the schools have closed. Mike, how are you coping with it?
Well, with the exception of schools, that was your lifestyle summed up there, really. Unfortunately, wasn't it? The first three items, and I suspect lots of people really. How am I coping? Yes, okay. I mean, it's working from home and operating from home is something a lot of us are used to these days. Clearly not for long periods at a time, and I think that will be challenging. As some of you may know, I'm a governor at a couple of schools. We've been quite busy supporting them through all of the changes that are going on, and a lot of great work by the staff at them and schools, of course, up and down the country. I think I'm trying to avoid being a news junkie because, frankly, it's not very nice. But it's going to be interesting to see how the country copes as we move on. The weather brightening up a bit's definitely helped.
It has, but you're not allowed outside very much. So which of course is going to be a problem when you've with all the kids now being or pretty much all the kids being home from school. So that's going to be a real issue over the next few weeks, I suspect. These things aside, obviously the government it had its budget, but anything it was planning for and its forecasts seem to have been completely scuppered by this plague that's beset us at the moment. Looks like they're going to be spending something like £1 trillion to help prop up the economy to try to, if not stop a recession, at least stop a depression. Although obviously it depends how long this plague lasts. Talk of paying 80% of certain people's wages, supporting the economy in various different ways. Mike, what do you think the impact is going to be of spending so much money on the economy?
Yeah, just taking a step back for a moment, the budget was a couple of weeks ago now as we record this. They scrapped VAT on e-books and newspapers. There was $5 billion for the NHS and other services as a result of the virus. There was $6 billion pledged to the NHS funding for new staff over 5 years. And there was a national insurance change that made people earning over $9,500 a year, £85 better off. And I sort of put them out, and they were some of the big headlines, just flicking through it, reminding myself today of what had been in there. They pale into complete insignificance to what's been announced in the last few days. Like all government spending, it comes from one of three routes. it's either a tax on you eventually, or a tax on you now, a tax on you eventually because they're borrowing it now, or it's a tax on you through inflation because it's quantitative easing. I imagine this will be a mixture of the latter two. We're not already covering they're not going to increase taxes at the moment. So quantitative easing will eventually feed through to inflation. And there will be massive government borrowing, which will reduce the scope for investment in infrastructure that Boris had hoped for in years to come, and reduce the scope for general government spending. It's hard to understand what the economic impact is. I can't think of anything that's even close to this in my life or in history that I can think of. Not where you could measure the economic impact in real terms. Thankfully the numbers, there'll be a tragic number of people unfortunately that pass away, but indications are it's a controllable number, and that's what the government's working towards. So there will still be people looking to work at the end of this, looking to run the economy, would be of a similar size and shape at the end of this period, but with a huge number of businesses that have gone out of business, a huge change in how we live our lives, and it strikes me it's going to take a few years for us to bounce back.
I think so. I mean, and it's going to affect all kinds of industries in many, many parts of the world. Obviously, we focus on the UK, but it's going to hit economies all over. I mean, just looking at from a sporting context, sure, the Premier League's probably all right to delay its season for a couple of months, but there are other sports that are far more precarious in their finances, who are looking at possibly missing half, if not the full season. So economically, that's going to be devastating for them. But obviously, you've got loads of people who work in particular industries. Obviously, now the pubs and the restaurants and the cafes have shut. These people often work shifts. They're not necessarily full-time employees. They're not going to be able to do any shifts. It's going to be absolutely tragic for them if this goes on for a prolonged period of time. And as you say, there'll be some businesses which simply can't cope with it. I know there's talk of various government-backed loans, there's talks of various subsidies, etc. But you can just see this being devastating, sadly, for some businesses. But as you say, once we get through this, there'll still be lots of people who would be looking to work, and lots of people who will have money and will be looking to spend it. So hopefully it's just a short-term hit, but I think you're right. It will take a couple of years probably to get over it, even if it's just a 2 to 3 month downturn.
There's lots of small businesses that operate on a knife edge, as you say, that the proprietors of them often might be better off in a different line of work, but enjoy the independence, want to create their own legacy and run their own business, and fully understand that. This is going to move them out of that, I suspect, in many ways, and we will see a further reduction in the high street, I'm sure, based on that. It's something you mentioned about this plan for recovering 80% of wages, which is massive sensible plan from the government. I understand why they've done it. I would normally be in favour of state intervention, but when the state has told you to close down, it is beholden on the state to keep you going in some way. But I certainly spent an awful lot of my life, and I'm sure I'm not the only one listening to this, relying on overtime and on-call payments and extra shifts to keep my head above water. My basic salary alone really didn't do it. And the people in that position now, I do have great sympathy for, because the 80% is fantastic for them, and I don't know how else the government could do it, to be brutally honest. But 80% actually only represents, or 100% of their normal income salary only really represents 75% of their earnings, and that's going to create a lot of challenge for people for a few years to come.
Indeed. Moving on from the short or longer term economic impact of all this, we're seeing clear signs that our civil liberties are going to be impinged upon. I think we all have to, to be fair, we all have to play our part in this. So I'm pretty much not going out at all now. Yes, that's because the pubs are shut and the and obviously the gyms are shut, and I'm able to work from home to a great extent. But we've seen some actions from governments on the continent where whole cities have been put into lockdown, and there's certainly some suggestion that that's going to be the case, at the very least in London. Scary times, Mike.
Yeah, hugely scary. I'm fortunate. I've got a back garden, and obviously people who live in flats, which has become a massive way of modern living, don't have that benefit. And maybe you've got gardens around your flats or what have you, but in lots of cases, particularly in central Croydon, as I think, and a lot of London, that's not so true. Generally, the advice up to now, and that could change literally as we're recording this, has been that you can go out, you just need to keep a distance from people. So certainly I'm a keen walker, and most days I will find a reason to walk around a park and back home, and come into contact with no one en route, because you just don't have to. But I suspect that may stop. The big worry with civil liberties is not now. Look, if we need to be shut down for 12 weeks, whatever it might be, then that's what needs to happen to save lives. I get that. I'm desperately worried or concerned about many in government, not necessarily, and I don't necessarily mean the governing party or even MPs. I think the civil service, the wider government, who frankly don't want us to drive places, don't want us to drink as much, want us to eat better, and feel that often the way we live our lives is not to their liking, using this as an opportunity to keep that going and continue to enforce restrictions on pubs and fast food outlets and driving once we're done. It may be slightly, I don't consider that a conspiracy. I don't think they're doing that for that reason, but there is a great worry that people keep that going. And I think there's a couple of quotes that sprung to mind, which was Ronald Reagan's "Trust but Verify" and Theodore Roosevelt's "Speak softly but carry a big stick." And in both of these, I trust the government. I'll speak softly about the government. We're doing the right thing. It's really important. But as a people, as we get through this, we need to make sure and hold them to account to rolling back the impositions that they've necessarily passed on us at the moment.
I did see somewhere that there was a suggestion that there will be a sunset clause on the emergency legislation that they're looking to bring in, which is good, I suppose. But yeah, I think we do have to be vigilant. As you say, it may not be Boris Johnson or whoever, but people who they use various tactics. It might be a bit of tax here, a bit of tax there. In some instances, stop you eating too much sugar or what have you. But we do need to be vigilant that, as best as we can, we go back to our way of life once this is all under control. Some people's lives will change. Obviously, some people sadly will be succumb to this illness. Other people will lose jobs. They may have to go and seek a career in another industry, perhaps in some instances. So things won't go back completely to normal for everybody. But I think it's important that from a civil liberties perspective that things go back to normal as soon as they possibly can do. And I think it's up to us all to do our part, yes, during this troublesome time, but also to be vigilant as time goes on.
Just quickly on that,
Mike.
Dan, you mentioned the sunset clause. It's really important to bear in mind that the gyms, the sports, the pubs, the many shops, many takeaway outlets, all restaurants have been closed without that law being passed. So even if they sunset the more extreme measures they're looking to bring in, there's still an awful lot they have been able to do prior to that. So yeah, I completely go along with it, and one of the things we might come on to, I still get regularly interviewed by Sputnik Radio, and I've said as much to them, but they've been able to do a lot without having without these new laws, and we just need to be vigilant that it's regressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think
better word.
The impression I get about the shutting of the pubs is very, very strong advice, and it was kind of like, you are going to shut them though, aren't you? Without actually passing a law to do it at all, with or without a sunset clause. So I think that's where we are with that. Obviously, the emergency legislation will no doubt provide for that. We'll just have to see, because you'll see that the pubs are saying that based upon the advice of the government. So it's not actually the law, I don't think, but we'll see. One of the impacts of these issues is, of course, that the local elections in England have been put back a year. We don't have local elections as such in London. We weren't scheduled to have local elections as such in London this year, but of course we had the GLA elections, and the mayoral election was due to take place in May. That's now been deferred for another year, so it's another year of Mayor Khan. He was already favourite to win in May anyway, but he's not even going to have to seek election for another year. Some people will say this is a boom for Labour, because they're not going to have the cataclysmic results that they might have got in England in any event, but perhaps not in London. So there's an impact there. Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's amazed that the government moved so quickly to push it all back a whole year. I think you're right in London. Khan was very likely to win, although I should declare an interest in collecting signatures and signing for David Curtin for his run for mayor. And obviously we fully support, not we as an organisation, but I personally fully supported him in that. Yeah, it looks likely that will stand as it is. A boom for Labour, yeah. I mean, it's, who knows what's going to happen with elections and party support. Support for Boris has never been higher. I'm not sure as things progress that will stay the same. And I imagine almost on a weekly basis you could roll a dice on what the support for the individual parties are, and that's going to stay the same as long as this is things are like this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, of course, this is a period, perhaps out of necessity, of, for want of a better expression, collectivization, which, of course, is what the British electorate voted against just a few months ago. But, of course, the circumstances were very different then. This is
just on that.
Yes.
Just be so thankful we did two things. One, voted a majority government, because imagine a scenario now where every time the government of the day wanted to do something in response to this emergency, they had to pull together a coalition. Just how difficult that would be. And the second thing is, I'm so thankful they voted for the Conservatives. That Labour Party was an absolute shambles. I'm not saying there aren't talented people in it, but Corbyn and McDonald would be terrifying. They wanted to do what's been done in an unprecedented emergency as business as usual. Imagine how far they would go if they were given the chance. Imagine how restrictive they would be if they were given half a chance. We just need to be very, very thankful that Boris got the election result in December that he did.
Indeed. The Croydon constitutionalists, unfortunately, we had to postpone an event that we were going to be holding, a Leavers of Croydon drinks. that we're going to be holding last weekend. We do have another event planned at present for April. April the 21st, I think it is. It's a forum on the future of the BBC. We'll obviously have to wait and see for a little while to see whether that's going to be able to take place. We'll certainly let people know whether that is in fact going to be postponed. It was to be held in a licensed venue, so as those places are now closed down, I suspect unless we see some change in that in the next couple of weeks, that we'll have to postpone that as well. But we will keep you informed about that. Well, if we can move on from COVID-19, and we certainly hope that we do get to move on from it at some time in the next few weeks fully. The Labour Party is actually holding a leadership election. It's been holding it for some time, but we will in the next couple of weeks. We're gonna learn who the next Labour leader is. Mike, what do you make of the three candidates who've made it through to the final stage?
Before I come on to that, Danny, you know what's just struck me? I believe the Lib Dems are also holding a leadership election as well at the moment, and it's not crossed either of our minds to ever cover it.
So as far as I know, they've only got they are and they aren't. They've got a position available, but there's only one person who said they're actually going to stand, and I think they've just delayed the whole thing.
Okay, well. Who would care either way? But yes, indeed, no, that's good to know. But yes, let them come back to us when they've got a position on something.
Exactly.
Labour leadership candidates, though, yes. So obviously, we have the favourite Keir Starmer, the architect of their anti-Brexit strategy that served them so well in the 2019 general election. We have Long Bailey, the chief supporter of their Marxist dogma strategy that served them so well in the 2019 general election, and Lisa Nandy, who seemed promising, but really, really wants a 40-year-old hairy bloke to follow your teenage daughter into a changing room. I'm not sure how that goes down with most working class voters, but I can't imagine it will go down terribly well.
Quite, yeah. It's the main issues they seem to have discussed are, was Jeremy Corbyn that bad? How bad was our Brexit policy? It was your policy. No, it was your policy. And then the most interesting thing they've got themselves all confused about is this issue over transsexual rights to self-identify, and if you're born a man and you've been put in prison for rape or some such, you're allowed to then identify as a woman and get put in a woman's prison, and such craziness as that. That seems to be what they've been having their biggest arguments about when they've been having these hustings.
Yeah, Keir Starmer is a credible person for the role on many levels. I think Lisa Nandy was a credible person for the role on many levels. I think she's actually been found out by this campaign. Long Bailey just strikes me as shocking, as bad as anyone has been that could be running this for this party. You asked two questions there. Was Jeremy Corbyn as bad as he thought it was? Yes, it's the worst result Labour's ever had since they first won office. Was their Brexit strategy that bad? Yes, it's the worst result Labour have ever had since they first ran for office. I mean, where else do we need to go with this? You can't go forward pretending that that's the right set of policies. Now, it looks like Keir Starmer will win, and I'm sure he will be a good holding pattern for the party. And maybe in the current situation, he will look a credible person in the opposition that governments do need. Lisa Nandy, I had great hopes for, but she's come out to be very anti-Brexit still. very pro-free movement still, and how she's got herself caught up in this trans debate, I've no idea. I'm very libertarian, identify as anything you want, but don't put rapists in women's prisons. Just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. That I think we have a duty of care to prisoners. Putting rapists into women's prisons doesn't seem like a good idea.
No, it's wokeness. It's not political correctness gone mad. It's wokeness gone mad. It's who's the victim here? What's the hierarchy of victimhood, etc. And they've just got themselves very, very confused with this whole debate. And yeah, I think it's seriously damaged Lisa Nandy's credibility. In any event, it looks like Keir Starmer's the favourite at the moment, from what we understand. And the result's going to be announced on the 4th of April. They were due to have a sort of spring conference to a big rally to announce the result, but that's been cancelled, obviously, in light of the restrictions on movement and gatherings and what have you because of the Wuhan coronavirus. But democracy doesn't end with the Labour Party. Actually, maybe it does. But DEMOC, the campaign for a democratically elected mayor for Croydon, has been going strong over the last few months until recently. Mike, how's it been getting on, and where are you in terms of getting the signatures to force the referendum?
Well, we need 5% of the electors in Croydon to get the referendum. That means we were aiming to collect about 15,000 signatures. Now, it's more than 5%, but you go through a verification process, people move, things change, and we wanted that sort of number. At one point, a few weeks ago, we were on target to get well over 20,000, the rate we were going at. Obviously, things had pared back. We had changed our strategy slightly from knocking on doors, partly due to the virus, but partly due to just circumstances, to delivering letters, because we had we done an awful lot of door knocking, and the next most effective thing we could do was to get a lot of letters out, and we were doing that. Obviously, they've now paused as well, but we have over 14,000 signatures, so we are there pretty much. Obviously, as I say, campaign suspended. We are within our year of collecting signatures, so the 5% must all be collected within 1 year. We still have 5 months left of that. Who knows what will happen in the next 5 months, but without doing very much, I think we're there. What will become our next question is just collecting in the last signatures. So anyone listening to this who's got some or had some, send them in. If you were thinking about signing, you can download a form and send it in to us. I assume you can get out to the post office, of course. Well, I'm sure you will be able to. You can get those in, so please do. And then really at some point we need to pick a point to take that forward. But it's not top of everyone's agenda at the moment. It's kind of more a case of right now of settling down. We are where we are, but the support has been huge. We worked on the referendum, and in New Allington, it's fair to say we were pretty popular. People really liked us in our Vote Leave t-shirts and campaigning up there. This is more popular. Everywhere I've been, knocking on doors, standing in streets, people are, and the rallies, the big meetings that have been held, this has been so popular to change the way that Croydon's governed, and a fantastic show of democracy from people. So pleased about that, pleased we're there, and it may be May next year now, but I'm pretty sure there will be a referendum coming our way.
And have you had much? Have you heard much from the current leadership of Croydon Council or any of their acolytes? Well,
Tony Newman has decided to make me a bit of a target for his defence. It's fascinating. This Tony Newman's sent out a few letters to Labour Party members that may have come into my possession, and he's tweeted as well about this being a UKIP campaign, because I'm in UKIP, although fairly publicly not, as covered in the local press, and we've spoken about. Why would that matter? Frankly, I've collected, or we have collected 14,000 signatures. They're not all from anyone in UKIP. It's fascinating that Tony Newman's go-to place in saying we don't need a democratically elected mayor is to attack the people who are running the campaign or are campaigning for it, rather than to stand on his own record. I would only ask the people listening to this to ask themselves the question why, after 6 years in power, Tony Newman can't stand on his record. Instead, he has to attack the people that are exercising their democratic rights against him.
You certainly seem to have got him a bit rattled anyway, which is always good.
Just on that, Dan, I'm one activist. I've been out on the streets collecting signatures. I have stood for things. I'm not, neither of us are unknown in the borough. Let's be honest. But I'm just one activist. I've collected some signatures and what have you. Tony Newman's paid, I think, 65 grand a year. And I say it again, he's not been able to stand on his record that we pay him 65 grand a year for, but instead his campaign is to say, look at that one activist. It just speaks to character, and it's not good at all.
Well, fair enough. I won't disagree with you on that one. So we'll see how this progresses. Obviously, as you say, the campaigning is suspended as effectively for now. There's some work going on in the background in terms of verifying signatures and such, but there's no sort of active knocking on doors for obvious reasons at the moment. But yeah, we'll certainly keep the listeners informed as things develop on that. Now then, Mike, I don't know about you, but without there being any sport on TV, and I'm not going to watch Coronation Street if that's even still a thing anymore. So we've got some interesting articles and interviews on our website, which people may want to read whilst they've got a spare 5 minutes or half a day or what have you in this troubling time. Mike, why don't you tell the listeners about some of the things we've got on our website?
Yeah, absolutely. So since the last time we spoke to you, we've spoken to a lot of people and had them write for our website, and we've put up some of our own articles. First one, just after the election, Mario Crottura, the Conservative Party candidate in Croydon Central, wrote for us. Really interesting article, just about how the election was for him. He worked incredibly hard. He's a well-known councillor in Croydon, had worked at number 10 previously. Croydon Central had previously been considered a fairly marginal seat. I think we've seen that change as the Labour vote has grown in London. But he worked incredibly hard, and it's just an interesting insight into what it's like for running for Parliament. And there's a little line here. He says, if a volunteer can knock on 100 doors in a given canvassing session, around 2/3 of the people will be out, which means activists might speak to 30 people a week. There are 81,000 electors in Croydon Central alone, so it takes years to get around it even once. And that's just, anyone that's done that before, and anyone that wonders why they don't see politicians on their door, just the scale of it and the small number of activists is really interesting to work out there. So well worth a read if you're interested in politics and in the campaign locally at that time. Shall I move on to talk about some more?
Please do.
Items there. So not long after that, we spoke to Jeet Baines, the Conservative candidate for Luton North. Now, you might wonder why we were speaking to the candidate for Luton North, but Jeet is a councillor in Addiscombe. Used to be my councillor in Colston as well. He's pretty well known locally. Very interesting, forthright interview he gives. Really quite straightforward. One thing that's kind of amusing as things stand in the current climate, and amusing is a tough word to use, but I think you have to see some dark humour occasionally. He writes, throughout the campaign, I felt this election, the electorate had a clear choice between a Marxist agenda from Labour and an economy-boosting agenda from the Conservatives. I agree with him, but just interesting to see in these times. Now, Jeet's really interesting in that he's got the only split ward in Croydon, and he in Addiscombe Addiscombe East, splits the ward with now she's either deputy mayor or possibly by the time you read this or hear this, Mayoress Maddie Henson, the new civic leader for Croydon. She's a well-known councillor, Labour councillor, very popular local figure, and I say they both won one election there, and I think they both won it partly on local personality, which is a really good thing to see. And on that, he talks about the fact in Addiscombe East, we focus on making a difference to local residents rather than fighting over our political differences. I think local people quite like this arrangement. And I can imagine where that happens, quite by chance, it actually works quite well if you've got sensible heads. So again, Jeet's an interesting article. He's quite forthright in what he says. And, someone that's stood for Parliament, someone that's big locally, well worth having a read of what he's got to say there.
Yeah, good stuff. Now yourself, you had a little trip, didn't you, a few months back to Australia, and you've written a piece for us, haven't you, on what you found out there in terms of the differences between here and there, and also you visited I think it was the Victorian Parliament over in Melbourne. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the article that you've written for us?
Yeah, and our listeners, I just hope you understand the level of sacrifice that I've undertaken here. Last year, or 2 years, a year and a bit ago now, I took time out to go to Southern California to see the Libertarian Party of Orange County and talk to them about their organisation and report back to you. And in early December this year, I had to struggle through going to Australia and visiting both the Victorian in Melbourne and the New South Wales parliaments in Sydney. It's not just joy being Croydon constitutionalist. We pay a lot of effort in for you, the reader. But if you want to have a read about that, I cover some of my just thoughts on time in Australia and some of their politics. Fascinating. My first day there was an Axe the Rich sticker, which looks from an organisation called Class War Australia, on a lamppost in Darling Harbour, Sydney. Now, Darling Harbour, think Canary Wharf, super rich area. No doubt the person who put that up there lives in a £1 million apartment. Quite strange thing. Talk about both the parliaments, very similar to the British Parliament. Really, just interesting to see that similarity and how they hold on to some of our inheritance that perhaps we've lost ourselves. And just general talks about Australia's sport, sadly not surrounded at the moment. But if you're interested in politics from another part of the world, have a read of that. Hopefully you'll find something new and informative in it.
Oh, very much so. So other things we've got on our website at the moment, we've got some photographs I seem to recall from our the 31st of January when we had some a little impromptu get together in terms of celebrating our formal departure from the European Union. So thank you to everybody who did come along to that, and their photos of the evening on the website. We also had an interview with the still London Assembly member and will be for the next year as well, of course now, and the would-be independent mayoral candidate David Curtin. So that's well worth a read. Obviously, he's going to continue as an Assembly member for another year due to the delay in the GLA elections, and time will tell whether or not he then continues to stand for that position or indeed carries on with his thoughts of being an independent mayoral candidate.
Just on that, David's great at being very clear about what he thinks. There's a quote in here that he's written for us of what he's written. People have a choice to vote for someone who's pro-Brexit, pro-Trump and anti-woke if they want to. There's completely unapologetic, and he's a really cheerful, a happy warrior, David. So well worth reading. He's a fascinating bloke, and will be running for mayor in a year from now, no doubt.
Yep, certainly well worth a read. No, right. You gave a speech at the Cools and Debating Society, didn't you? And you've written a little piece up about that. How did that go?
Yeah, so as many of you know, I'm because I've published these before and we've spoken about them, a member of a local debate society. Uh, the debate was put on of implementing green policies to combat global warming is imperative to save the earth. That was the title. I was opposing the motion, and as the nature of these things, someone opposes and someone proposes. What was quite interesting on the night, the person proposing the motion said to me, "Oh, I thought I was opposing it. I just assumed no one could oppose that. It's so clearly the case," and it hadn't crossed his mind that people might not agree with that worldview. Yeah, very friendly society, so it was a very enjoyable debate. I lost, as is often the case, but I definitely changed the minds in the room. I think it's a big hill to climb because there's so many people that just told global warming's a thing and it matters and we need to do something about it. Interestingly, out of this pandemic, I suspect that driver may fall away. Suddenly, something in 50 years from now is not so significant. I started the speech with a couple of quotes. I just want to make people think of this. Stanford University professor Paul Ehrlich said in April 1970, at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. Well, clearly that didn't happen. In 2006, Al Gore predicted we had 10 years before the planet's turned into a total frying pan. Clearly that's not the case. In 2008, ABC News predicted that New York City would be underwater by June 2015. And I made a point that a lot of these people actually buy beachfront properties, despite the fact they think the sea levels are rising beyond belief. There's a lot of dishonesty in the global warming debate. If you're interested in a different view on it, or indeed you share the view and you want to see it summarised, have a look at my speech and come back to me. Tell me what you think of it.
Yeah, no, definitely people should do that. And as you mentioned, obviously people may have more things on their mind at the moment, but it's one thing to think on, isn't it? Really, this current pandemic came from China. And we rely so heavily on China, particularly for manufacturing of goods. If the global warming people had their way, any much manufacturing that we have left or that we could develop would be destroyed because we wouldn't be able to basically have the fuel to actually make those goods. Whereas they don't seem to be too critical of China and its coal-fired power stations that are producing all the energy that they're using to produce these cheap goods, which we import by the shipload, basically. So it'll be interesting to see how they think about China going forward. Also got a couple of other articles on there at the moment. One from Peter Sonnix, he was the Brexit Party candidate for Croydon Central. He's thinking about whether or not everything's done. Is Brexit done, and whether there's other things that we should be we or the Brexit supporting community should be looking for in terms of political reform. Mike, what do you think about that?
Just something you touched on a moment. Brexit's not high on people's agendas and minds, and understandably so. But I think for all our sanity, now's a good time to read about global warming, Brexit, listen to a podcast, obviously hopefully one of ours, but something else about something different from what's going on. For all our sanity, take your mind off the immediate problems once in a while, every day, just for your own good. Peter makes some good points. I like the quote, I'm proud of what we achieved. I remain humbled by the selfless support of a team of volunteers coming from all walks of life and political persuasions. And I get that, having run myself. The Brexit Party ended up doing not very well, but we shouldn't the phrase, the Latin post hoc ergo propter hoc, I believe, and I only know this because I heard it on the West Wing once, is that what came before what came after is because of what came before, and it's not always true. basically we see after they didn't do very well, but we shouldn't forget that we only got the Brexit that we got on the 31st of January, and we only got the government we got because the Brexit Party were there influencing events, pulling people across from different walks of life, getting volunteers involved who aren't normally involved in politics, and they should be justifiably proud of what they achieved. Even if the voting outcome wasn't very great, the influence on the political system was absolutely massive.
No doubt about that. And finally, we've got hot off the press, if that's still a thing. We've got an interview with Maureen Martin, who was a would-be GLA candidate, as we know that those elections have been delayed, for the Christian Parties Alliance. So it's another article there for you to read to pass the time at the moment. Well, Mike, I think that we'll call it a day there. Really, we can go and see what further lockdowns we've been put into, perhaps. But yeah, let's keep this going in these uncertain times. Please do get in contact with us. I know some of you might be in various forms of isolation at the moment, so we're here to chat through these things. You can contact us on Twitter at Croydon Const, via our Facebook page. You can go to our website at croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or you can email us. It's croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. As I say, we do at the moment have a forum on the future of the BBC planned for April, but that's obviously going to be subject to postponement given the current restrictions. Mike, is there any final words from you before we sign off?
Yeah, please get in touch. If you are finding yourself with some spare time, we would love to hear from you, read your articles. We're doing this via Skype, so we can interview you. We can do written articles. We do interviews on our website by writing to people as well, rather than necessarily of needing personal contact. Not that we wouldn't love it once we're out of this. So yeah, do please get in touch. Let's create some content. Now's a great chance to do that, and it will be good for you to, I think, if you're exercising that creative gene, and good for people to read it. So please do think of us, and we'd love to help.
Please do stay safe, everybody, and we'll be in touch in due course with a new podcast and more articles for our website, and we'll definitely keep you involved and updated on what events we've got planned. But until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.